You're gonna see guys making out in the bench at 2 a.m. in one of the main parks in Madrid. Or you're gonna see two guys hiding behind bushes giving each other Quite frankly, after spending 2 months in Spain, the thought of just recording a video in my room kind of makes me want to kill myself. If you live in the US, you know everything that's going down with the anti-trans bills, which recently Spain did have to deal with a little bit, though unlike us, they actually did seem to figure their shit out. But I want to talk about the culture. Culturally, how open is Spain compared to the US? The best way I can describe it is, honey, you're going to be seeing rainbow flags there even when you fall asleep. The culture is just so much more accepting of LGBTQ plus people, to the point where there's so many straight allies. Pride was just seen as a moment to celebrate love in general. Whether it's queer love, straight love, you know, everyone's included. We love. Pride aside, living there as a gay man on a day-to-day basis, very different experience from living as a gay man in the US. I've lived for the past 5 years, almost 6 years now, in North Carolina, which is, you know, southeastern US, pretty rural state in general, even though it has a couple big cities sprinkled throughout. But I have been to LA, the gay capital of the world. But comparing Madrid to LA, there's still a huge difference. Starting with the straight people I interviewed. Overall, what they kept repeating was, it's normal. Being gay, trans, queer, etc. was seen as normal. You're not weird or different, but they still acknowledged that there was a reason that pride exists. And perhaps the answers that stuck with me the most were the ones from the two girls I interviewed in front of the Starbucks. I remember I asked them,
¿Crees que es bueno que estén habiendo muchas más personas que estén siendo abiertamente homosexual o trans? ¿O piensas que debe ser algo más privado?
To which they responded with,
Al final creo que si se hace público es porque hay una sección de la población que no lo aprueba. O sea, se hace público no por el gusto de cada uno, sino porque se sentirán discriminados en cierto modo. Entonces, yo entiendo que se tiene que hacer público por el hecho de que hay gente que no lo ve bien. No se debería hacer privado porque se seguiría discriminando de la misma forma.
And that's overall what I kept hearing from straight interviewees who were allies or at the very least just wanted queer people to not be bullied. They understood that being openly gay is not something that you do because you want to see yourself as someone who's special and you want to stand out from the crowd. People are loud and they express themselves not for their own egotistical benefits, but because they know that the more they say it, the more normal it's going to be. And the more safe, more people are going to feel to actually come out themselves. Because believe it or not, we live in a society where a lot of people still don't feel safe coming out, which I know a lot of people, especially if they're straight and they're just looking at all of this from the outside, are going to be like, no, like obviously homophobia doesn't exist anymore. Gay marriage was legalized, therefore equality. And that's obviously not the case, because just how racism wasn't solved in the US when Obama was elected, homophobia wasn't solved when same-sex couples could finally get married. You shouting from the streets that you're gay or bisexual or asexual or trans or intersexual or any other identity that I left out, it's not an act of self-indulgence. It's a way of telling people that don't feel comfortable enough to come out that they're safe, and most importantly, that what they're going through is normal. Even in LA, you didn't really get a sentiment that you were entirely safe being a queer person. As opposed to North Carolina, you could express yourself to a larger extent than you could here, but you still have to be cautious. And that feeling of needing to be cautious is something that I personally never felt in Spain. Again, Madrid. Another thing that I asked people was how many queer friends you had, specifically to straight interviewees. And for the most part, people can be disingenuous with their answers, but going off of what they said, everyone seems to have queer friends. So like, again, it's the fact that it's so normal that people don't really see it as weird when you have a friend that is gay. In Spain, people just saw it as normal. Yeah, you are gonna have a couple friends that are queer because queer people exist. Like, they're not lottery scratch cards that win you $15, which you can then brag about to your friends. Like one of the interviewees said, I think it's only like around 10% of the US population identifies as LGBTQ+. Like, they identify with an identity that's a part of the community. I would argue that the reason that that number is not higher is because, like I've said, we still live in a society where so many people still see being queer as a bad thing or just something unnatural, which in turn causes so many people that feel that they might be queer or know they're queer to just stay in the closet and in some cases hurt themselves. And some people I knew did give me nationalist vibes in the sense that they were like, yeah, Spain is the most welcoming country to gay people in the entire world, or at least in all of Europe, and we had the biggest pride march, and really, why would you look outside of Spain when we're so welcoming? Like, they didn't say that, but they gave me those kind of vibes. And honestly, to be fair to them, that statement about Pride March being the biggest one, at least in Europe, I definitely think it's true. I think it may even be the biggest one in the entire world. As someone who's only lived in Puerto Rico, North Carolina, and LA, and now briefly Madrid, I really wouldn't argue that much with them. But you did have people, like you saw, who called out Spain's homophobia.
Me salió el otro día en Instagram un caso de que habían pegado a un chico por ser gay y yo es que creo que todavía la gente no entiende que eso es algo normal. O sea, que lo tenéis que normalizar y no es tan como, hostia, este es raro por ser gay. Somos personas y ya está.
So overall, Europe, like the US, it has its fair share of hate crimes. But as you saw from this other interviewee,
en mi opinión, lo que he visto en Ucrania y en otros países, que España es más abierta.
Spain is pretty open. Like, compared to the rest of the world, it's pretty hard to find it better than that. Not a single straight person I interviewed said, I think this is too much. You'll see gay people in every single corner. Like, you're gonna see guys making out in the bench at 2 a.m. in one of the main parks in Madrid. And you're also gonna see a lesbian couple holding hands in one of the metros. Or you're gonna see two guys hiding behind bushes giving each other...
Don't do it. Don't do it.
At least in Madrid, you cannot hide from the gays. You'll see a rainbow flag in every corner, and I'm pretty sure they're there the entire year. So you would think that with so much queer exposure and, so much gayness, straight people, you would think that at least one of them would say, they could turn it down a little bit. If we could maybe not have a massive pride march that literally forces the entire metro system to shut down in the city, I wouldn't have a problem with it. Like, if they could be a little bit less in your face, then I'd be happy. I'm not saying this as if like the US was a very homophobic and unwelcoming country where you absolutely cannot be queer and all your straight friends are gonna target you. We're very behind on our tolerance of queer culture. We're nowhere near the level where Spaniards are. Let me give you another anecdote. First day when I just arrived in Madrid, I get to my Airbnb. My host starts explaining to me the ropes of how things work in this house that I shared with 7 other people. And one of the first things she asks me is to not throw the front door because it's old and it's loud. She tells me, Abdiar, trata esta puerta como tratarías a una chica, a una novia. And just as I'm about to roll my eyes, she really says, o a un chico, a un novio. This lady, I think she's like 50 or 60 years old. That's just an example of how normal Spaniards see queer people. I think it's about time that we get into the cons. Because I've been talking it up. I've been all like, why are queer people moving to any other country that's not Spain? What should you know about Spain if you're a queer person that's considering visiting, moving there? Here's what you should know. Racial diversity. Yes, Madrid, capital of Spain, it's diverse, but nowhere near as diverse as literally North Carolina, which again is a mainly rural state in southeastern US. I remember the first night I went out clubbing, I went out to this club, and literally one of the first things I noticed as I walked up to the bar to order my drink was the fact that out of the entire crowd that was there, I could probably count with one hand the number of people in the entire bar that weren't white. When it comes to racial diversity, Madrid just doesn't compete with North Carolina, and I don't even think comparing it to LA is fair competition at that point, but there is some racial diversity. And there was a noticeable Latin population, but again, compared to LA, it's like putting Rocky in a boxing ring with Napoleon Dynamite. And racial diversity aside, a lot of white Spaniards, and yes, their culture in general, lacks a level of self-awareness that we do fortunately have in the US. There's a reason that white people can't say the N-word. There's a reason that we stopped allowing white comedians from making racist jokes where they try imitating a Hindu accent. And of course, you're still gonna meet Americans that are gonna be, for lack of a better word, blatantly ignorant So what's the problem with Spain? White Spaniards don't get it. And I obviously don't mean every single one of them. I just mean that a large portion of them doesn't understand that making certain jokes is wrong, especially when those jokes are geared towards racial minorities. How does this connect to queer culture in Spain? Well, you might think that queer culture tends to be very progressive with racial issues and very open to people that aren't white. But unfortunately, a lot of times that's not the case in Spain. One Saturday night, I dressed up, went to a nightclub, and there was a drag show at this nightclub. The drag show was fun. It had this drag queen that did stand up at the very start of the show, and she was making a lot of explicitly sexual jokes, which I thought were really funny. And then we get to a joke where she basically says that there's 3 different glory holes, and she's gonna try to guess what each person who she's trying to please in these glory holes looks like based on how their tastes like. Because in this hypothetical scenario, she's doing it blindfolded. She does the first one, and her first response is, that one tasted like curry, so he's from Pakistan. I also often notice I got objectified in Madrid. Maybe it's because I'm Latino and a lot of guys see me more as a sexual object than a human being. That's the kind of stuff that kind of makes me pull back from actually considering Spain as a place that I would want to live in permanently. Because believe it or not, queer culture aside, it was incredible. With everything that I just said about people being so progressive on queer issues, add to that public transportation, universal healthcare, but there were a lot of downs during that trip. And some of those downs had to do with me hearing those racist comments, or me being objectified by a white guy, or me just not feeling safe. I'm also not saying that being a racial minority in Spain is impossible, because I would like to go back to Spain. Because like I said, I did generally have some great experiences with some people. I would recommend visiting Spain if you're queer. Regardless of your skin color, I do think that it's worth visiting. Keeping in my mind everything that I just said, and also just keeping an open mind. Sometimes people are open to listening, and they're open to changing, and they're open to understanding you, which sometimes leads to having a more welcoming space. Anyways, I'm so kind of sad that I can't make out with a guy on a public park bench anymore, so I'm just gonna go back to my apartment and sob while I edit this 2-hour video.
You got me exclusive. I'm so high up and lucid. You take me to a safe place. We steady on the same pace, yeah. I'm crazy, you like that. Don't back down, no you drop back. Keep it spicy, there's a fat fact. We on the right track, yeah.